I dressed slutty for Halloween to make my husband jealous. I never thought he'd get revenge. Hello, Reddit. This is my first time posting, so I really hope I'm doing this right. My name is Lily, and for the sake of privacy, let's call my husband Paul. I'm 31 years old, and Paul is 30. We've been together since high school. We're high school sweethearts, and we've pretty much grown up together. It's only been a few years since we actually got married, but we've been through so much together that it feels like much longer. I thought we had the kind of relationship people envy: supportive, caring, and really close. I've always loved Paul, and he's never had any issues showing his love for me either. He's the type who'd do anything to make me happy, and I guess that's why I took his affection for granted. There's never been a question in my mind about his loyalty. He's not the kind of person to look elsewhere or even think of doing something that might hurt me. In my mind, things were solid between us, like really solid. But here's the thing. I'll admit it. I crave attention, especially from Paul. And yeah, some people might find that strange, but for me, if he doesn't get a little possessive or at least mildly jealous now and then, it honestly feels insulting. It's like this nagging question in my mind, wondering if he's even paying attention to me or if I'm just some background character in his life. I know it's probably not the healthiest way to think, but that's how I've always felt. I mean, what's the point of being together if you don't even notice each other, right? Paul isn't wired that way, though. He's the secure type, the kind of guy who trusts wholeheartedly, who doesn't question things unless there's hard evidence. He doesn't get jealous easily, and I know that's supposed to be a good thing. He's supportive, he's confident, and he trusts me completely. And in theory, I guess that's wonderful. But to me, it was frustrating. I wanted him to be possessive in a way, to get jealous sometimes, to react like he was afraid of losing me. I just loved that feeling of knowing he wanted me enough to be a little threatened. I know it's a bit childish, but I love the thrill of keeping things exciting, making him notice me in different ways. I dress up just a bit more provocatively, make little comments here and there, all for that reaction. It wasn't that I wanted him to be mad. I just wanted to know he cared, that I could still make him feel something intense. And sure, he had plenty of ways of showing that he loved me, that he wanted me. But that little bit of jealousy, that was the proof I needed, the thing that made me feel most desired. It was like validation, a reminder that he wasn't taking me for granted. In the beginning, he used to get a little annoyed by it. We'd argue over my little stunts because he just wasn't the kind of guy to put up with games. He'd tell me I didn't need to go out of my way to make him jealous, that he loved me enough without all that. But I couldn't stop myself. I'd keep pushing. I'd go just a bit further each time, hoping for a reaction, something more than his calm reassurance. But as time went on, he stopped reacting. He'd just brush it off or laugh, and then we'd move on like nothing happened. That's when things really started to get to me. His laughter, his nonchalance, it drove me insane. It was like my efforts were meaningless, like I was invisible. And so I kept raising the stakes, doing things that even I knew were a bit too far, all in hopes that I'd get the reaction I craved. But he always just stayed calm, almost as if he was expecting it. It made me feel like I'd lost my grip on him, that no matter what I did, he was never going to give me the reaction I wanted. So I started turning things up, almost treating it like a game. I was determined to break through Paul's calm exterior. I wanted to show him that he couldn't just sit back and brush me off like he didn't care. I would go out of my way to do anything that might get a rise out of him. At social gatherings, I'd flirt with our friends, leaning in close, laughing a bit too much, and turning on every ounce of charm I had. I'd touch their arms while talking, let my laughter linger a little too long just to see if Paul would react. Most of the time, he'd just roll his eyes or give me a look, and that drove me even crazier. It felt like he was daring me, silently challenging me to go further. So I did. When we went out, I'd make it a point to dance with other men, keeping eye contact with him to see if he'd finally say something. I started making borderline inappropriate social media posts, photos I knew he'd find a bit too revealing or captions that hinted at single life, just ambiguous enough to catch his eye. I'd obsessively check to see if he'd viewed them and wait for a reaction. But when he'd see the post and still didn't say anything, I felt dismissed, like my efforts meant nothing. And so, I'd up the ante even more. I started accidentally sending him texts that were meant to look like they were for a friend, saying things I knew would spark jealousy, like raving about another guy's sense of humor or his looks. I'd wait until he read them, then quickly delete the message, pretending it was a mistake but hoping he'd remember it. I even went as far as to compare him casually to my idealized version of a man, implying subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, that he wasn't measuring up. Before our dates, I'd dress more provocatively, knowing it would turn heads and half hoping he'd get irritated or say something. I'd pretend to get texts from old friends, talk nostalgically about my exes, and even take calls from male friends in secret, so that he could wonder what I was hiding. All of it was just to push him, to make him jealous, to make him want to hold on tighter. At first, Paul stayed coy and nonchalant. He'd shrug, give a little laugh, or walk away when I tried something new. It was almost like he was humoring me, which only made me want to go further. But then finally, things started to shift. He began pulling me aside, talking to me about it, asking me to tone things down, to stop trying to get under his skin. He said I was embarrassing him, that it felt like I was trying to undermine our relationship in front of everyone. And honestly, I was thrilled. I'd finally cracked through that stoic wall, and I felt like I'd won. It felt like I'd proven something, and I was elated to know it was finally getting to him. Instead of slowing down, I saw it as a sign to turn things up even more. When he'd tell me to stop, that I was crossing lines, I'd just brush it off, or even laugh it off. Now, instead of feeling satisfied, he looked frustrated, genuinely annoyed, and I felt like I was holding all the cards. But the more I pushed, the more serious he got. Our conversations about it weren't just talks anymore. They were arguments. He would tell me he felt humiliated, that he was losing respect from his friends, that he couldn't stand the constant games anymore. But even then, I didn't stop. I felt like I'd finally found the formula to keep him engaged, even if it meant crossing every boundary. I kept pushing. I kept pushing harder and harder, not even stopping to think about how much damage I might actually be causing. Honestly, I didn't care, because to me it felt like Paul was the one who needed to change his attitude. All of this, it wouldn't even have been happening if he'd just played along the way I wanted. I kept telling myself he was overreacting, that he was being dramatic. I mean, couldn't he see it was all just a bit of fun? I wasn't serious, and it was never meant to be harmful. Maybe I was wrong. A little. But at the time, it was hard to admit even that much. I didn't think it was hurting him that deeply. Or maybe I just didn't want to believe it. But it got to the point where even our friends were getting involved. His friends, my friends, our mutual friends, they started pulling me aside at gatherings in private whenever they saw the opportunity. One of his closest friends even sat me down once and tried to explain how badly Paul was feeling. They said he was losing confidence, that he was questioning everything. And instead of taking that seriously, I just brushed them off. I told them Paul was being overly sensitive, that he should know me well enough to understand I was just teasing him. It honestly felt like they were all overreacting too. I mean, I'd laugh it off or make some sarcastic comment, and sometimes I'd even get defensive. I'd tell them I was doing nothing wrong, that it wasn't my fault if Paul was feeling insecure. If anything, I felt a little betrayed that they were taking his side. Like, weren't they supposed to be my friends too? But as more and more people kept talking to me, it just felt like they were all ganging up on me, making me out to be the bad guy in this. And that only pushed me to go further. It got to the point where even our families were intervening. I didn't spare him, not even in front of family. Looking back, I guess it was almost second nature by then, flirting with his brother at family gatherings, laughing a bit too hard at his cousin's jokes, subtly putting Paul down with these playful jabs that weren't as harmless as I tried to convince myself they were. And slowly but surely, our family members caught on. They started to notice this pattern I'd created, this bizarre game I was playing, and they began to approach me about it, carefully at first, as if they were afraid of setting me off. I brushed them off, just like I had with everyone else. I'd laugh it off or say they were reading too much into things. But deep down, I knew they weren't wrong. I just didn't want to admit it, because that would mean facing my own actions. To me, it was like this big test. If Paul truly loved me, he'd fight for me, right? He'd finally get jealous, finally show that he cared in the way I wanted him to. That's all I wanted, really, was for him to break through that nonchalant front. So I kept going, kept pushing, convinced that he'd have to crack eventually. I thought he'd eventually come around, that he'd finally see me and give me the reaction I was looking for. And okay, now that I actually look back on it, now that I'm being honest with myself for once, I realize how wrong I was. I mean, really wrong. It's embarrassing to even admit, but there were so many points along the way where I could have stopped. I had more than enough opportunities to reflect, to realize how far I'd taken things, but I was too caught up in my own game to even consider it. I was convinced I was doing no real harm, that it was just our thing, this silly little routine that would ultimately bring us closer together. But now, with the clarity of hindsight, I can see that I was tearing us apart piece by piece. This Halloween, I pushed it, way too far in hindsight. I wanted his full, undivided attention. I wanted to make him stop whatever he was doing and really look at me. So I went all out with my costume. It was a bit much, I'll admit that now. But it was Halloween, right? Isn't that what the night is all about? A chance to dress up, have a little fun, and of course, get a reaction. Only this time, the reaction I got wasn't the one I was looking for. Paul barely glanced at me when I came downstairs in my outfit, like it was nothing unusual. Instead, he just shrugged and continued getting ready. I had gone way out of my comfort zone. I was expecting at least a raised eyebrow, maybe a possessive look. But nope, he was unfazed. And as the night went on, it only got worse. At the party, Paul kept his distance. He barely stayed in my orbit. Instead, he seemed to be spending an awful lot of time with someone else, a woman I vaguely knew but didn't think much of until that night. They were laughing, dancing together, and just looked comfortable. Way too comfortable for my liking. And I couldn't even say anything. I had backed myself into a corner with all the stunts I'd been pulling to get a rise out of him. How could I now accuse him of trying to make me jealous? I'd just end up looking hypocritical. So there I was, standing off to the side in my carefully chosen outfit, watching my husband laugh and flirt with someone else. Someone who was apparently good enough to hold his attention. Someone he actually seemed engaged with. The worst part was that I felt completely thrown. I'd always known Paul to be the steady, loyal one, the kind who'd only ever have eyes for me, no matter how many games I played. And suddenly there he was, treating me like I was invisible. For the first time, it hit me how much I'd taken his loyalty for granted. And that sinking feeling only grew as the night went on, watching him not react to me, but instead focusing on someone else entirely. It felt like a slap in the face, honestly. For so long, I had been the one steering the ship, playing my little games and pulling him along for the ride, and now he'd somehow managed to flip the script. He wasn't supposed to play by my rules, wasn't supposed to flirt with someone else. Yet there he was, all buddy-buddy with her, laughing at her jokes, barely glancing my way, as if I was just another person at the party. And I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. For the first time, I felt jealous and confused. I'd gotten so used to his little sighs of exasperation, the occasional protective glare, even the arguments, because in some twisted way, they all reassured me he cared, that he was invested. But now, his nonchalance, his indifference, it all left me off balance. From that night on, it was like Paul was a completely different person. Or I guess he was on a silent mission to make me feel every bit of insecurity I had thrown at him over the years. And here's the thing. He didn't even need to be obvious about it. He didn't yell, didn't call me out, didn't even try to make a scene in front of our friends or family. No, Paul was far more subtle than that. And that was the worst part. He turned everything around in such a careful, calculated way that it left me constantly second-guessing myself. It was like he knew exactly what would get under my skin, how to push my buttons just enough to drive me crazy, without ever crossing a line where I could openly call him out. And that's when it really started hitting me. I had been so used to Paul being this steady, almost predictable presence in my life. The one who, no matter what I did, would just shake his head and brush it off. But now he was doing things I never would have expected. He would have these friendly, engaging conversations with other women, women he knew I didn't like or felt threatened by. He'd give them his full attention, laugh a little too easily at their jokes, even lean in close as if he was genuinely interested. And the worst part? He'd do it in front of me, just close enough that I could see everything, but never close enough that anyone else would notice. It was like he had turned everything I had done to him back on me, only now I was on the receiving end, and it felt terrible. What really started to get under my skin was how Paul seemed to know exactly when to turn up the charm with other people. He would make eye contact with a friend's girlfriend just a little too long, or he would stand just a bit too close to a female colleague at a work event. It wasn't enough that anyone else would think anything of it, but I knew Paul, and I could see the shift. And he never once broke that calm, indifferent facade. And the longer this went on, the more I started to feel like I was the one losing control. He had found a way to make me feel exactly the way I had wanted him to feel. The subtlety of it all was brilliant, I'll give him that. He didn't have to say anything hurtful or do anything overtly disrespectful. He just existed differently. He'd come home a bit later than usual, with no explanation other than a casual, got caught up at work, or he'd suddenly have plans with friends that he didn't invite me to. And if I asked, he'd just smile and say he thought I wanted my own space, that I had seemed more independent lately. It was infuriating. He was twisting my own words and actions around in a way that left me looking like the crazy, jealous one. Even in front of our family, he managed to get under my skin without anyone noticing. During family gatherings, he'd start conversations with my sister or my cousin, people he'd usually be polite but distant with, and suddenly he'd be laughing and leaning in, looking so engaged in what they had to say. And here I was, sitting across the room, fuming, knowing that he was doing this on purpose but having no way to call him out. Because technically he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just being friendly, just being polite. And every time I tried to mention it, he'd look at me like I was overreacting, like I was reading too much into things. Honestly, it started making me question myself, like maybe I really was the problem. I'd done so much to make him jealous, to get a rise out of him. And now, when he was finally reacting, it was like he was holding a mirror up to all of my own worst tendencies. And it was humiliating. It was horrible, honestly, because Paul had managed to play this game better than I ever had. And he did it with such calm precision that I didn't even realize I was losing until it was too late. I felt terrible, honestly, and it's like I was trapped because I couldn't even confront him. I mean, what would I say? I had no real proof that he was doing anything wrong, no solid evidence, and that ate at me. I tried to keep it in, but it got to the point where I just couldn't anymore. So finally, I confronted him, thinking maybe he'd finally admit to playing this twisted game with me. But he just looked at me like I was insane, like he had no clue what I was even talking about. It was infuriating. He was calm, collected, acting as if I was the one out of line. And that's when things really blew up. It turned into this massive argument, way bigger than I'd expected. I remember he just looked at me dead serious and told me he was done, that he couldn't handle my insecurity and selfishness anymore. He actually had the nerve to call me a hypocrite, saying I'd been undermining him for years and he was finished putting up with it. And then, he kicked me out. He straight up told me to leave. Like, how did we even get here? One minute I was trying to get him to see my side, and the next he's telling me to pack my things and go. I was so angry I didn't even try to argue further. I just left, and I went to my best friend's place because there was no way I was going to my parents. They've always sided with Paul whenever things got tense between us, and I already knew what they'd say, that it was my fault, that I was overreacting and that I'd pushed him too far. I just couldn't handle hearing that from them too. But even my best friend didn't take my side. She listened, sure, but the second I mentioned how Paul had been acting, she just shook her head and said he hadn't done anything wrong, that he was just being polite and respectful. She practically scolded me, saying that I was projecting because of all the jealousy games I'd played over the years. She actually said she was surprised Paul had stayed with me as long as he had, that he'd been the one making all the compromises and putting up with my behavior. She flat out told me that I was the one who needed to apologize and try to make things right. That hit hard. I mean, if my best friend thought that, maybe I really was the problem. It gave me this bitter reality check I hadn't expected, and I suddenly saw things from a whole different perspective. So I tried reaching out to Paul, thinking I could just apologize, make amends, and things would go back to how they used to be. But he didn't respond. For days I sent him texts, left voicemails, tried calling him. Nothing. He completely ignored me. It was like I'd become invisible to him. Finally, after about a week, he agreed to talk. But when we spoke, he was so cold. He told me plain and simple that we were done, that he had no interest in trying to work things out. He was absolutely firm that he was moving on, and he wasn't going to give me another chance. I panicked. I mean, Paul and I have been together for so long, since high school, and I never thought he'd actually leave. Now I don't know what to do. I don't want a divorce. I don't want to lose him. I've realized, maybe too late, that he's always been the one keeping us grounded, the one willing to compromise. And now he's not even giving me the chance to make things right. I've tried everything I can think of to reach him, but he won't budge. So my friend suggested I post here, hoping to get some clarity or advice from people who don't know us personally. Maybe someone here can help me see things I'm missing, or at least help me figure out if there's any way to fix this. Am I really that much of a narcissist? Am I just beyond help? I don't know anymore, but I can't accept that this is how things end between us. Update. Hey Reddit, sorry it took me so long to post an update. I've received a lot of DMs asking for one, so I thought I'd let you all know what's been happening. First off, I need to say thank you for the reality check. Seriously, the comments on my last post opened my eyes in ways I didn't expect. They made me realize just how wrong I was and how horrible I've been throughout this whole situation. If you're new here, I made my original post a few months ago and you can check my profile for the details. So I posted here a couple of months ago about how my husband and I had fallen apart after I wore a very revealing dress to a Halloween party. That was just the tip of the iceberg, and the comments I received were eye-opening. I also made an update post about 2 days ago, but it got deleted by the mods. Looking back, I really wish I'd had this reality check before everything spiraled out of control. So many people pointed out that I was being incredibly selfish and manipulative, and it's painful to admit that I was. I honestly never thought it would get this bad, and I'm sitting here feeling isolated and completely alone. The only person I can rely on is my best friend, and even that relationship is rocky. We've had so many arguments lately that I don't even know where we stand anymore. My family, my parents, and my siblings are all at odds with me because of my husband's lies. Paul has gone around telling everyone that I cheated on him, and it's infuriating. The worst part is that no one believes me when I insist that's not true. Everyone, even my best friend, is convinced that I must have cheated before, and now they think Paul is just a saint for putting up with me. My best friend was the first to accuse me of lying about it, saying that I must have cheated on him before and that he just hadn't found out until now. It's infuriating. I've made mistakes, sure, but cheating? No. I flirted in the past, but I never crossed that line. Yet here I am, being painted as this horrible person, and no one wants to hear my side. My family believes Paul's version of events, and they're all disappointed in me. It feels like I'm living in a nightmare where no one is on my side. It's not just my friends and family either. Our mutual friends have all reached out, but instead of offering support, they've berated me for my behavior over the years. They tell me that Paul was a saint for putting up with me and that I deserve everything I'm going through. I can't even describe how crushing that is. I never thought my actions would lead to this kind of fallout. But wait, it gets worse. Just when I thought things couldn't spiral further, I discovered that inappropriate photos of me had been shared online. I have no idea how they got out there, but my first instinct was that Paul must have been behind it. After all, he was the only one who had access to them. When I confronted him, he flat out denied it, claiming he would never do something like that. It's like I'm losing my mind. My photos are everywhere, and I couldn't even go to work anymore because the news spread so far and wide. As a result, I lost my job. I worked in a professional environment, and once the scandal hit, they had no choice but to let me go. I received a measly severance package and nothing more. Now I don't even leave the house. Everyone seems disappointed in me, and I feel so ashamed. My so-called best friend hasn't even checked in on me, and I'm starting to question whether I can even call her that anymore. I feel abandoned, and it's like my whole life is crumbling around me. And then to top it all off, I got served with divorce papers. It's surreal. I've reached out to Paul multiple times trying to salvage what's left of our relationship, but he just keeps shutting me down. He doesn't want to try counseling or therapy. He's just done with me. It's heartbreaking. I feel like I've lost the love of my life, all my friends, my career. Everything that mattered to me is gone. So I'm sorry for not updating sooner. Life has been absolutely wild, and I'm just trying to navigate this mess. Update. Hello, Reddit. It's been a while, hasn't it? I apologize for not updating sooner, but life has been, well, life. There's been a roller coaster of events, and in some way I still feel like I'm on that ride. I haven't come down yet. Last time I updated, I shared how my life had taken a nosedive, getting fired from my job, inappropriate photos of me leaked online, and losing everyone I cared about because Paul told everyone I had cheated, and they believed him. My best friend and I fell out, and she eventually kicked me out. So yeah, life has been crazy. A lot of the comments back then were harsh, with many saying I deserved it. Honestly, I won't argue with you. A part of me feels like I did deserve it. I let things get that bad, and it really was bad. After a while, I started receiving spam messages, calls, and emails from every corner. It was overwhelming. I had to change my number 5 times because it kept getting leaked. The constant stream of spam calls and emails made my head spin. I thought ignoring them would make them go away, but no. Each time I tried, it just got more frustrating. I started to feel like I was going crazy. I eventually had to privatize all my social media accounts because people I once considered friends were commenting horrible things about me. They painted Paul as this saint, this good person I never deserved, which is just mind-boggling to me because I'm pretty sure he's the one egging them on. The divorce was finalized, and let me tell you, it was painful. This was the person I had been with for such a long time, the person I thought I would spend my life with. It felt surreal and devastating to have it all fall apart. I cried a lot, more than I'd like to admit. Even after the divorce was finalized, I found myself sending drunk messages to Paul, begging him to take me back and forgive me. I've stopped that now, but I still find myself stalking his social media, missing him so much. It's crazy how deeply I feel this loss. I never imagined that we would end up as strangers. I've lost all my friends and my career. Now I work a shitty minimum wage job, which only adds to the misery. The treatment I get from customers and even colleagues feels degrading. They trample on me, and I can see how entitled they feel. I won't name the job, but I'm sure you can guess it's in a pretty popular industry. So yeah, I've been trying to just exist. I feel like I'll never recover from this mess, and part of me wonders if I even want to. It feels like this is my punishment for everything that's happened, and maybe I deserve it. Or rather, I definitely do. My family has completely cut me off. They believed Paul over me and took his side without hesitation, which is incredibly disappointing. I feel completely alone, lonely, broke, and miserable. I can't blame anyone but myself for this situation. It's tough to come to terms with the fact that I've burned so many bridges. So yeah, I guess you all probably love hearing this sad tale of woe. I wish I could say things are looking up, but the truth is, I'm still stuck in this dark place. I hope I can eventually find a way out, but right now it feels impossible.